70-year-old rusty jack plane rescued and repaired. So there's this great festival up in the Thumb of Michigan, and it's centered around an octagon barn, and they've got a bunch of craft tents and a bunch of vendor tables, and you're going to see antique tools everywhere. So it's kind of fun to shop around, and I definitely picked up a few things. I actually saw this old torpedo level just to the right there. I picked that one up, and I haven't grabbed it yet, but there's this 14-inch rusty jack plane just to the left, and this thing was in pretty rough and rugged shape. But not knowing a whole lot about the brand, not knowing a whole lot about the problems that I was going to find with this, the price tag said $9. I got it for $7, and I brought it home. One of the other things I wanted to check out is they had this turn of the century. When I say turn of the century, I mean 19th century sawmill, which was pretty cool to actually watch this in operation, to see how these things were actually used to cut trees down into lumber. And this was driven, if you can believe this, by this really turn of the century tractor with a very large fabric belt that ran into the barn and that actually drove the entire sawmill. The smaller setup was used to peel off veneer off of this log. And so what was cool about this is, my first thought is plywood, but they actually used this veneer to make bushel baskets for corn and every other type of vegetable. So it was a really great visit to the Octagon Barn. Now, let's get down to the work. So as I started to look at this thing, I mean, it had cracked handles. They were both wobbly. As I took it apart, the rust was just really thick in the blade area and also in the frog. And if you don't know what I mean by a frog, it was a learning experience for me too. It's the piece that actually serves as the bed to the blade stack. But just pulling this stuff apart, it was in really, really terrible shape. Also, the two wooden handles on the front and the back were both cracked and pretty wobbly. So I knew that I had to replace these. And here's the individual parts laid out. This is the bottom of the plane. Now, the good thing about this find is that it was flat. A lot of times if you see a plane getting dropped, it's going to wreck the actual bed of the plane, but this actually sat pretty flat on the table, which was lucky. But the next step is really to get the rust off of it. So I set myself up with a little dunk tank and some vinegar, and it was time to give all of these components a bath. So I wanted to wait a couple hours while that soaked, so I got started on the handle replacements. And here is just a matter of tracing it out. And, because the handle's rounded, we're going to wind up having to do a lot of grinding and a lot of shaping to get it right. So after tracing it around, I also measured out a small block here for the front handle. And I'm going to take a chance, and I'm going to use this block of Hawaiian koa wood that I have. And koa wood is a little iffy. It's a pretty hard block of wood, but every now and then you're going to run into these loose, fibrous sections of the wood. So as I was cutting into it, I wanted to make sure I didn't run into any of that soft, fibrous center that occasionally you will hit with koa. And both of my blocks were in pretty good shape all the way through. Now, the other thing that I had to do is there's a bolt that runs all the way through the center of that handle, so I had to measure it out so that I could drill the hole properly. Now, for the front handle, I just ran this on the lathe, and it isn't going to be a completely rounded knob. I actually wanted the front knob to be a little bit bigger to better fit my hands. And so now that I had those rough pieces cut out, it was over to the belt sander to get them ground down, to try to round over the handle as best I could. And there's only so much you can do on the belt sander. but at least it got me to kind of a rough blank. And then I just finished it off with the hand sander, rounding it over, every now and then checking it against my hand to make sure that it was smooth and that it was a good fit. And you'll wind up doing the same thing if you take on a project like this. Just give it some time, work with the sandpaper, get it so that it's comfortable in your hand, and you'll be in good shape. This actually took more time than anything else. And so now we're about ready to pull all of the steel parts out of the vinegar bath. In here I just wanted to cancel the acid with a little Dawn and some water. And now I'm just scrubbing off all of the rust that's been loosened up by the vinegar. This is the frog. That was actually in pretty good shape. I was a little worried about that, and that's a critical component to the plane, but I did not have a lot of damage to that. Most of the damage was to the bottom of this plane, to the inside, and to some of the other parts. So for the wooden pieces here too, I had to get them all drilled out. And in order to reuse the bolts that came with the original plane, the measurements of the handles had to be exact. In other words, the only way the bolt would fit is if the height of this front knob was exactly the same as the height of the one we removed. So I took extra care to make sure that height was good. And this was my last check of the bed. I knew that it was pretty flat. I could see it on the bench, but until you sand it, and this was 320 grit, I could see that it was sanding evenly on the bottom, and that was a good sign that the bottom of that plane was still relatively flat. So it didn't look like it got dropped. It didn't look like it got damaged, and that was lucky for me. Now, I didn't follow the traditional method for blacking this plane surface out. It's called Japanning, and it's a lacquer treatment that you add to turn it black. In this case, I just used black enamel paint. And then for the wood, I'm just finishing it with spray lacquer. And for me, it took 3 coats ultimately for these 2 pieces. So, after everything dried, let's put it all together. And so even though this is one of the lower cost versions that you could get from Sears at the time, built anywhere between the 30s and the 50s, this Dunlap brand, it still had some other features like an adjustable frog that allows you to move it back and forth and adjust the bed for the blade set. But I do have to replace this blade. Now I'm putting it all together and I got the rust off of it, but this thing was destroyed. It's nowhere near at a 90-degree angle. So this is a visit to Amazon, and you can get a fresh blade that fits this plane for anywhere between $9 and $15. So that's what we're going to do. And so for a $7 investment at the Octagon Barn Craft Show and Fair, there was a bunch of different vendors out there with tools laid across tables. It was a little bit like a candy store. There's a bunch of different tools that I saw. I picked up a couple extra things, but maybe we'll feature those in another video. But for just $7, this cleaned up pretty well. And the big thing was that the sole of the plane, and 14-inch planes I don't see very often. So this was flat, and that's the big deal. If there's some way you can check it out before you buy it, this will save you a lot of pain and agony. We did have to replace the wood handles, of course. They were just destroyed and cracked. And I made this one a little bit oversized because it fits my hand better. But this is going to turn out great with the Hawaiian koa. Really pretty now that it's done. There's nothing I can do about the pitting. This is a lower cost plane. This was made by Dunlap. It was sold by Sears alongside Craftsman, which was a little better quality tool, a little thicker. But for the investment, This is a great little project that you can do yourself. You soak it in some vinegar, you take a wire or steel brush to it to get the rust off, and you might have to do some other reconditioning, but you know, why not? Are you looking for a stick? Do you want to find a piece of wood? Or do you want a cookie? You want a cookie? Yeah? Let's go get one. Well, you know, Dash chasing me downstairs to bring me back upstairs, but the project turned out great. Here's the glamour shot. Hey everybody, thanks for joining us for the video. We really hope you liked it, and we also hope you subscribe to the channel. Take care.